stories I told you about. P. Diddy be wanting to party. Already played the old lady as an FBI agent. We can play anything now. We can be playing a dog catcher this time. Why do we need to be in a dress? And I get so mad, I say, you don't want me.
On January 3rd, 2024, Katt Williams sat on Club Shay Shay and issued a warning. All these big deviants are catching hell in 2024. All lies will be exposed. 8 months later, Diddy was in handcuffs. Then 50 Cent dropped a Netflix documentary that was supposed to expose everything. But somehow every major name Katt had been calling out for years was missing. So who decided which celebrities were too dangerous to mention? And what are they still hiding? Join us as Katt Williams reveals all the celebrities 50 Cent left out in his Diddy documentary. The man who slept in Kevlar. Someone spent 9 consecutive months living in close physical proximity to Katt Williams, not managing him or working a press cycle, just present inside his actual daily life, watching how he operated. When this person eventually spoke publicly about what he witnessed, what he described had almost nothing in common with the version of Katt Williams that had been running in the entertainment press for years. That version was the erratic and unstable one, the one getting arrested, fighting in parking lots, and losing the plot entirely, the one whose personal behavior had been so successfully made the story that most people genuinely stopped processing anything he said before it even finished landing. What this person witnessed was a man operating inside a very specific and very calibrated kind of fear, not paranoia, which is fear without a real object, but the kind that only develops in someone who understands with real clarity what they have gotten close to, what the people they are publicly naming are capable of doing about it, and exactly how exposed they are. And the detail that makes that distinction impossible to dismiss is this. Every single night before Katt Williams went to sleep, he put on a bulletproof vest. Every night, as a ritual. The person saying this wasn't passing on something he'd been told. He was there, in that house, watching it happen across 9 months without a single exception. Those 9 months ended on one particular day when the Illuminati breached the house. What it produced was a line, the moment when someone who had spent 9 months absorbing everything Katt knew about the architecture of this industry looked at what had arrived at their doorstep and made the immediate decision to leave. He said leaving was hard. The industry's response to all of this was not a lawsuit. They used the oldest and most effective tool available, the steady, quiet, consistent amplification of a single story. The message the industry needed the press to keep running was simple. This man is not reliable. Look at his arrests. Look at his behavior. Look at who he is, rather than what he's saying. And it worked for long enough that Katt's specific first-hand documented proximity to the highest levels of this industry was rendered invisible through the accumulation of tabloid coverage. When Cassie Ventura's lawsuit landed in November 2023, when the hotel hallway footage went everywhere, when federal agents hit Diddy's Los Angeles and Miami homes in March 2024, when the arrest came in September, everything Katt had been saying began finding its confirmation in federal court documents.
Now to Sean Diddy Combs' investigation, new surveillance video shows Combs being taken into custody in a Manhattan hotel last week.
Piece by deliberate piece. The person who described all of this publicly was Jaguar Wright, singer, industry commentator, someone who had spent years making her own pointed claims about the entertainment world before this account surfaced. She said in April 2024 that she met Katt Williams at her own 30th birthday party, that he arrived, handed her $20,000 in cash, and told her to consider it a down payment on her time. She said he taught her more in 9 months than she had learned anywhere else. She also said she has never told a lie. If this man knew enough that he couldn't sleep without armor, why did the biggest documentary ever made about this world not contain a single name he had been publicly saying for years? And how did 50 Cent get that footage in the first place? The interview that changed everything. By the morning of January 4th, 2024, the internet had already decided what the Club Shay Shay interview was about. The story that ran everywhere that first week was the comedian beef, Katt's allegation that Cedric the Entertainer had attended one of his sets at the Comedy Store in Los Angeles in 1998, watched him perform a specific routine, and then used that same material almost word for word as the closing bit on the original Kings of Comedy, a film that went on to become one of the most watched stand-up features in history. Then came the Kevin Hart portion, where Katt described him as an industry plant, someone whose rise had been engineered from the outside rather than built from the ground up through the kind of grinding, city-by-city club work that actual comedians do. Kevin fired back the next day, telling him to drop the anger. Hidden inside a nearly 3-hour interview was a passage of 24 seconds. Katt Williams looked straight into the camera and warned that in 2024, every powerful figure hiding behind lies and scandal would be exposed, no matter who they were, from Diddy to T.D. Jakes and beyond, adding that anyone offended by the message probably knew exactly why. And then he claimed he had turned down $50 million on 4 separate occasions to protect his integrity, saying he refused invitations from Diddy and insisting he had proof to back up everything he was saying. He didn't say he'd heard things or had sources feeding him information. He said he had receipts, meaning documented, producible, verifiable evidence for the specific claims he was making. Coming from Katt Williams in January 2024, with the years of tabloid coverage still running interference, it got clipped and scrolled past. 4 separate times across his career, Katt Williams turned down offers totaling $50 million because accepting them would have put him in the room with Diddy under conditions he wasn't willing to accept. That is not the behavior of someone who stumbled into proximity with this world and got uncomfortable. That is the behavior of someone who understood very precisely what was being asked of him, understood what the room looked like from the inside, and made the deliberate, expensive, repeated decision to stay out of it. The 24 seconds got attention in the first week, but didn't gain much traction because the media's focus on Katt was still centered on the comedian feud. Then, on March 25th, 2024, Homeland Security agents executing Southern District of New York search warrants simultaneously hit Diddy's properties in Los Angeles and Miami, and suddenly, a federal trafficking investigation that had been building quietly for years was everywhere.
2 homes belonging to rap and hip-hop mogul Sean Diddy Combs yesterday in connection to an ongoing sex trafficking investigation.
People went back to Club Shay Shay. Then, on September 16th, Diddy was arrested at a New York hotel, charged with racketeering conspiracy, trafficking by force and coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution, denied bail, and transferred to the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. The interview hit 80 million views and kept climbing, the comment sections filling with people writing variations of the same thing. This aired in January, and every word of it just got confirmed by a federal indictment. But the most important thing Katt said during that interview went almost completely unreported. Shannon Sharpe confirmed on Nightcap with Chad Okosinko that Katt had been developing new material. Katt addressed it himself at New York Magazine's Vulture Festival on November 16, 2024. He said he had gone into Club Shay Shay believing he had figured out the social media algorithm mathematically, and that he planned to use it. He wrote the material out, he said, with the specific intention of killing the careers of the people he was talking about. Then he described what he did next. He decided it was too vicious, erased all of the knockout blows, and left only the jabs, enough for every target to understand that he had their full story, but not enough to completely detonate it. Shannon Sharpe then confirmed on Nightcap with Chad Okosinko that Williams had continued writing new material since that interview, and said the haymakers might be arriving very soon. Before he sat down in front of Shannon Sharpe, he went through what he had written and deliberately removed the most damaging material. Which means the question worth carrying forward isn't what was in the interview, it's what he took out, and whether the names 50 Cent chose not to say in his documentary came from the same calculation. How 50 got the footage and what he chose to bury. Sean Combs. The Reckoning arrived on Netflix on December 2nd, 2025, and its opening sequence did something nobody who knew Diddy's relationship with the camera expected. It opened with Diddy himself talking. It wasn't archival footage from a red carpet 20 years earlier, and it wasn't a deposition clip that had leaked to the press. In the days before his arrest, Diddy still seemed to believe he could maneuver his way out of what was closing in. While speaking with his legal team, with a hired cameraman present, he was heard saying they were losing and needed someone willing to operate in the dirtiest kind of business. Those words, pulled from his own archive, were later turned against him by the rival who had spent 2 decades as his most outspoken enemy in hip-hop. Diddy had been building a personal archive since he was 19 years old. Parties, relationships, private meetings, studio sessions, industry events, He had been cataloging his own life on camera across decades, specifically for a documentary that he intended to control completely. In the days immediately before his arrest, when he was still telling people around him that he was going to beat whatever was coming, he hired a documentarian named Michael Oberlees to continue capturing footage during that period. There was no signed contract between them, and no payment ever exchanged. When the arrest happened faster than he had planned, Michael was out of state for 3 days. A third party who had been covering for him during that absence decided where the footage went. It moved through the informal networks that have always run parallel to the official music business, the ones that determine where leverage lands and who holds it, and it reached 50 Cent. Diddy's legal team called it stolen and sent Netflix a cease and desist. The timing of that letter is the one detail that cuts through every other layer of spin around the documentary's release, because they sent it the night before the premiere. A man already convicted and sentenced doesn't mobilize his attorneys the night before a streaming release because he's embarrassed. A letter like that is sent when specific content in that footage has the capacity to affect outcomes that are still genuinely unresolved. An 84-page appeal currently pending before the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, 77 civil lawsuits in various stages of pretrial discovery, and depositions that have not yet been taken in cases where the evidentiary bar is lower than what federal prosecutors need for a criminal conviction. Netflix released it anyway, describing the footage as legally obtained. The documentary reached #1 on the platform and hit 21.8 million views in 6 days, landing at 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, with critics almost universally describing it as disciplined and evidence-based rather than sensational. Kirk Burroughs, co-founder of Bad Boy Records, became the documentary's most explosive voice. He alleged that Diddy bore indirect responsibility for the death of the notorious B.I.G., that Biggie had been deeply uncomfortable being on the West Coast in the months after Tupac was killed, that on the night of his murder, he had wanted to leave Los Angeles and fly to Europe, and that Diddy overruled that decision because he wanted to stay and be at the party. Kirk went further, accusing him of having led Biggie toward his death, and he had handwritten journals from inside Bad Boy's operational period that he referenced as the basis for that claim. The documentary also included never-before-heard audio from a proffer session with Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, the man convicted in connection with Tupac Shakur's death.
The man charged in Tupac Shakur's murder is speaking out from behind bars for the first time. Dwayne Keefe D. Davis insists he was
placing Diddy in proximity to those events in ways the public record had not previously established. And yet, when 50 Cent appeared on The Sherry Show after the premiere, he confirmed that more than 100 hours of footage had not made the final cut. He described material that had shocked people with direct proximity to this case. He mentioned the possibility of releasing additional content on YouTube. A 4-episode Netflix documentary represented a fraction of what he actually had access to, which means everything seen was a choice, and everything not shown was also a choice. There were more names than Netflix was willing to carry, more footage than 4 episodes could hold, and a fuller accounting of a world that extended, as Katt had been saying for years, far beyond one man in a Brooklyn detention center. Because after all 4 episodes and going back through the names Katt had been putting on the record for years, the absences weren't gaps in the research. They had a shape. And the question is, why did 50 Cent not include those names? Was he because he couldn't, or because he chose not to? The names 50 Cent wouldn't say. What Katt Williams has been arguing is not that every person he names committed a specific crime. His argument is structural, that there are people inside this industry whose position is so load-bearing, whose value to so many interconnected revenue streams and cultural systems is so enormous, that the infrastructure protecting them isn't personal. The system protects them because the system cannot afford what their exposure would cost it. And Katt has said consistently that when real accountability came close, everyone would know exactly who those people were by watching what they chose not to say. Jay-Z's relationship with Diddy is one of the most thoroughly documented in the history of hip-hop, with decades of shared public events, business overlap, mutual institutional presence stretching back to the height of Bad Boy in the mid-90s and continuing forward across every major chapter of both their careers. Building a documentary about Diddy's world as it actually operated, Jay-Z is not a background figure. He is central, and his absence from a 4-episode Netflix series built on Diddy's own private footage is a decision that carries weight the documentary never explains. In October 2024, a civil lawsuit named both Diddy and Jay-Z, alleging that a 13-year-old girl was treated inappropriately at an after-party following the 2000 MTV VMAs. Jay-Z responded hard and immediately, framing the suit as an extortion attempt. His attorney said he had received what functioned as a blackmail demand, and he chose to fight rather than settle precisely because settling would imply guilt. In December 2024, the plaintiff gave an interview acknowledging that not all the facts are clear and that she may have misidentified someone. In February 2025, the lawsuit was voluntarily dismissed with prejudice and cannot be refiled. Jay-Z was never charged with any crime. In the days before the documentary aired, 50 Cent posted on social media using imagery that directly referenced that dismissed lawsuit alongside Jay-Z's name, a clear signal that he knew where the name belonged in the broader conversation. Then, the documentary dropped, and the name was nowhere in it. No legal allegation has attached Snoop Dogg's name to Diddy's criminal case. But Katt was never only describing people with criminal exposure. He was describing people whose silence, at the precise moment real accountability arrives, functions as a structural component of the protection network itself. From Diddy's arrest in September 2024 through the trial, conviction, sentencing in October 2025, the Netflix documentary in December, and the appeal hearing in April 2026, across that entire span, one of Diddy's most publicly documented long-term associates, someone photographed alongside him across decades, present at his events, woven into the same industry infrastructure at the same level, has not made a single substantive public comment about any of it. In an environment where people with far thinner connections to Diddy have been offering takes from every available platform, that silence is not an oversight, it is a calculation. And it is the exact calculation Katt described years before there was a verdict to be silent about. That calculation becomes clearer, closer to the source. Mase was inside Bad Boy Records at its absolute peak, the specific period the documentary draws from most heavily, the era when the Biggie allegations placed Diddy at the center of decisions with fatal consequences. His contract dispute with Diddy is fully documented. His departure from the label, his years of publicly expressed discomfort with what he had been part of, his statements about Bad Boy's internal culture, all of it is on the record. There is almost no living person with more direct first-hand proximity to the specific world the documentary examined, and Mase was not in it, did not speak publicly around its release, and has maintained a distance from this conversation that fits precisely the profile Katt described, the person who knows what the inside of the room looked like, who watched the walls come down from closer than almost anyone, and who concluded that silence was the only sustainable response. Kevin Hart requires a clear caveat because no allegation connects him to Diddy's criminal case, and that needs to be stated plainly. What Katt pointed at was different. The institutional gravity that makes silence feel rational, even necessary, when proximity to collapsed power becomes a liability. Kevin had been among the most visibly enthusiastic public supporters of Diddy for years, celebrating him in front of millions across awards, shows, events, and social platforms. When the arrest came, and the trial followed, and the conviction landed, Kevin went entirely quiet. It wasn't a carefully worded statement, and it wasn't even a single public comment about a man he had once championed. But that silence wasn't evidence of wrongdoing. It was, as Katt had described earlier, the same pattern he insisted existed long before anyone was paying attention. T.D. Jakes requires no interpretation because Katt named him directly alongside Diddy in that 24-second passage. What makes the name stick is a documented connection that predates any of the viral content. Since 2021, T.D. Jakes hosted a sermon series called Kingdom Culture on Revolt, the cable network Diddy founded. In February 2024, music producer Rodney Jones filed a lawsuit against Diddy.
Sean Diddy Combs is facing a new lawsuit from a producer on his most recent album. Rodney Jones,
claiming to have recorded evidence of Combs detailing how he planned to leverage his relationship with T.D. Jakes, specifically to soften the public fallout from Cassie Ventura's lawsuit. T.D. Jakes is not a defendant in that suit, and no criminal allegation has ever been filed against him. But the documented plan, if the recording Jones claims to possess exists, is that Diddy believed his relationship with one of the most prominent religious figures in America was an asset he could deploy for reputation management. In November 2024, he filed a defamation suit against a man who made claims about him on a podcast. In December 2024, his attorney filed a motion in California federal court to subpoena Google for the identities behind 4 YouTube accounts posting AI-generated content linking him to Diddy. T.D. Jakes later stated publicly that 44,000 bots had been deployed against him and that 98% of the content was artificially generated. He has never directly addressed Katt Williams' specific mention of his name. He was not in the documentary. And then there is the pattern that extends past any individual name, which is what Katt was always really pointing at. In the weeks after Diddy's arrest, executives across entertainment, corporate America, city government, and law enforcement began quietly stepping down from their positions, not in a single visible wave, but in the kind of staggered retreat that only becomes legible stepping back and looking at the aggregate. A former official is a much smaller story than a current one when a federal case starts expanding its reach. The exits happened before names could be attached. Each departure looked like its own isolated story. Together, they looked exactly what Katt described: an organized withdrawal by people who understood the blast radius before the press did. The verdict that came back on July 2nd, 2025, should have closed this story for good. So why does what happened inside that courtroom suggest the most important part of it hasn't started yet? The verdict: more is coming. Diddy's federal trial opened in Manhattan on May 5, 2025, and the prosecution built its case around a theory of sustained, systematic coercion, not isolated incidents of bad behavior, but a constructed apparatus operating across years and multiple victims through drugs, financial control, and psychological manipulation so deliberate that the people caught inside it lost the practical ability to leave. Cassie Ventura testified. The Frida Hotel hallway footage from 2016, which had already reached virtually everyone on Earth before the trial started, was formally entered into evidence. Cassie testified that when she filed her civil lawsuit in November 2023, she received a $20 million settlement within 24 hours of filing. A timeline that, placed against that footage, tells exactly what that settlement was purchasing and why it moved so fast. The jury received the case on June 13th. On July 2, 2025, they came back. The jury found him not guilty of racketeering conspiracy and not guilty of sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, but convicted him on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. The charges capable of putting Diddy away for the rest of his life were gone. What remained were 2 Mann Act convictions, a federal law from 1910 addressing the transport of women across state lines for commercial purposes. The prosecution had spent 2 months building toward life-altering consequences, and the jury handed back something that functioned by the measure of what had been possible as a partial acquittal. On October 3, 2025, Judge Aaron Subramanian sentenced Diddy to 50 months, 4 years and 2 months, plus a $500,000 fine and 5 years supervised release. The prosecution had asked for 11 years. The defense had asked for 14 months, essentially time served from the September 2024 arrest.
Hey, Will, yeah, the judge moments ago sentencing Sean Diddy Combs to 4 years behind bars, telling the court,
with credit for time already in custody, 50 months puts a release date at approximately April 2028. 50 Cent called it a win for Diddy, and with life in prison having been on the table, he wasn't wrong. Before the sentence was read, Diddy addressed the court directly, apologizing for what he called sick behavior and asking for mercy, his eldest daughter crying in the gallery, his family looking at each other with the specific expression of people who had prepared for a different outcome. What the sentencing record actually contains is this: a non-profit called RE Entry 1 Incorporated submitted a letter to the court outlining speaking engagements that Diddy had already scheduled for after his release, based on what he had apparently been telling people around him throughout the trial would be an acquittal. He had a calendar built for going home. He had told fellow inmates at FCY Fort Dix, where he was housed during the proceedings, that he expected to be free by early 2026. That nonprofit letter wasn't submitted by an enemy. It was submitted by an organization acting in good faith on information Diddy himself had communicated, and it landed in the public record as evidence that he genuinely had not prepared for a conviction on anything. Diddy wrote a personal letter to Donald Trump requesting a presidential pardon. Trump confirmed receiving it in a New York Times interview and made clear he was not acting on it. The context being that in 2020, Diddy had publicly called for Trump's removal from power and endorsed the opposing presidential candidate. As of April 2026, there is no pardon or indication that one is coming. The appeal, filed in December 2025, runs 84 pages and turns on a constitutional argument that Judge Aaron sentenced Diddy for conduct the jury explicitly declined to convict him of, with the acquitted trafficking and racketeering charges still embedded in the sentencing calculation in ways his attorneys argue constitute a fundamental due process violation. Lead attorney Alexandra Shapiro called the sentence draconian and accused the judge of functioning as a 13th juror. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals heard oral arguments on April 9, 2026. The outcome is still pending. While the appeal moves through the Second Circuit, the civil docket keeps advancing on its own timeline. 77 lawsuits, 12 settled or dismissed, 35 with active motions to dismiss in various stages of adjudication. The remainder in pretrial proceedings, moving toward the phase where depositions happen. In February 2026, a Los Angeles Superior Court judge allowed key claims in one civil case, sexual battery and false imprisonment, to survive a motion to dismiss and proceed toward trial. Civil proceedings run on a lower evidentiary threshold than a federal criminal trial. What 12 jurors declined to convict on can still be established in a deposition, and what was inadmissible in court can surface in discovery. And depositions don't care about structural protection or how carefully one has managed distance from a story. They issue subpoenas, they compel testimony, and they have a way of finding the people who have been strategically unavailable for years. The names that weren't in the documentary, the names that went quiet after the arrest, the names Katt Williams has been putting on the public record since before any of this was a federal case, those are precisely the names most likely to surface as that civil process grinds toward discovery. Katt said the truth doesn't get denied, it gets managed. He said that when Diddy was still running an empire and everyone around him believed the management would hold indefinitely. Everything since, the documentary that named what it could afford to name, the federal trial that convicted on what 12 people would accept, the appeal still pending, the 77 civil suits still in motion, every single piece of it confirms that the management operation is still running. The Netflix documentary was real, the federal conviction was real, but neither of them is the reckoning Katt described, the one that reaches the names the documentary wouldn't say, and based on where the civil cases are sitting right now, that one may be considerably closer than the people still managing their silence would like. Is the protection as deep as Katt Williams said it was? Or is the thing that finally breaks it already moving through a Los Angeles Superior Court on a timeline nobody is covering yet? And if Club Shay Shay was the cleaned-up version, the one with the knockout blows already removed, what exactly is in the version he still hasn't released? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.